This study is a little study and start from the need for a composer to play, edit, and record in his own pieces on the Disklavier, trying to maintain the maximum quality of performance that the Disklavier is able to do. The concept is how much data can a DAW digital audio workstation like a Cubase, for example, like a Logic, for example, compared to what a Disklavier produces. And is it possible to work with Yamaha XP MIDI file? Is an extension MIDI file, a type of MIDI bigger, no a normal MIDI file. It's possible to work with the Yamaha MIDI file extension in a DAW like a Cubase. Cubase is possible to see every data, every parameters of this type of MIDI file. This presentation grows for two connect lines of works. The first concert recording test is a registration, a recording directly in the Disklavier with a USB stick. The second way is directly record in Disklavier on USB to host, directly in the computer. And I try to compare the same song, the same performance in two different ways. And the second concept of this study is the analysis in Cubase, how Cubase is very good though to understand this type of two types MIDI, because the USB key and USB to host produce two different MIDI. It's not the same. It's not the same. Here I introduce the purpose of the test is very simple term. The idea is to compare two recordings of the same performance made at the same time but captured in two different ways. To make this comparison, I use two pieces with different characteristics. The first highlights pedal behavior, so everything related to sustaining the sound and shaping depth or resonance. The second highlights dynamic, articulation, and note duration. Two very different songs, which means it's more, this second song is more directly expressive for the touch. This is the data. In this slide, I explain that the first is the direct connection between the Disklavier and the computers through USB to host with the cable. And in this song, you can see how many numbers, how many parameters the computer is able to capture. This is the same song. This is the same song, but I recorded this song with directly USB stick. The number is very, very, very different. More detail, the same notes, but the controller, for example, is totally different. The number of controller, the number poly aftertouch is totally different. Now, I think that there is more detail in the recording by USB stick. And this is the point. But how is possible to obtain the same result in Cubase, in Logic? Because it's important for a composer write, play the piano, but also editing in real time, re-listen in real time. It's possible to check the phrase, the musical phrase, to recheck, to re-edit, and then, for example, to play, to recording with microphone, and to realize the CD or on the or for example, to present the performance in live. I think this point is an important point also not only for the classical music, for the classical musician, but also for the pop musician, electronic musician, experimental musician. This is the second song. And the result is the same. The second song, the note is the same, but the controller and the polyphonic aftertouch is not the same, is totally different. And I think that this is the focus. This is the point to create a very realistic performance and respect the response, really response of the piano. Then this is the summary, and I think in the left you can see the number of USB to host, and in the right you can see the number, the USB by stick. Okay, but now the problem is, this first idea is, okay, I try to start to compose, then I necessarily play the piano on the Disklavier by the stick. But if I try to compose a song that is not possible, like this morning, to play in the piano concretely, this is the problem. And in this case, I think during the test I try to search this solution, and I think that the first idea is, okay, if it's possible to play the piano directly, it's better for me play with a recording directly in a USB stick and stop. And in the second step, I put the MIDI XP file in the DAW. I edit this type of MIDI and I re-put again in the Disklavier. Okay. But in the second way, I think that the solution is to see some specific parameters of Cubase, of Logic, and that this type of parameters is the control change parameters, is CC parameters. And specifically, there are 3 numbers of parameters. That is, I think, important to do this. Because Disklavier, in the left, you can see a normal DAW, how to capture the data with 1, 2, 7, not 8 level. But this clavier create a lot of level. But and also the pedal, though, like a Cubase, for example, if you look at Logic, listen the on and off, on and off, and stop. But Yamaha listen 256 level or pedal. Is more detail. Is no is not the same. And then I try to search everything in this software. That I think this software is a really good software to do this type of experiment. And I try to search where is this controller, where is these parameters. And there is 3 parameters in Cubase. Then Cubase receive from the Disklavier, and Cubase explain that this parameter is a generical parameters. No, is no generical parameters. Is parameters about controller. It is 3 specific parameters. This 3 is one parameter is poly pressure, like an aftertouch, for example. Poly pressure is a control change 16. Is a control change 81. Control change 16 and control change 81 receive every controller, every speed of the release, the key, the pedal, and it's possible, like an example, this example, to see every type the speed and the characteristic of the every note is totally different from the velocity. This is the velocity, the dynamica, okay, piano, forte, mezzo forte. This, and this is the response of the key, the release, the speed of release of the key, the aftertouch, the speed of the release of the pedal. And then I try to edit this type of graphics, but I understand that there is another point to study, that when I try to modify these graphics and I try to return by USB to host in the Disklavier, is not possible because the USB to host is no a good connection to transmit this type of graphics, but it's possible to arrive at this type to edit because Cubase see this type of graphics, this type of value, and then it means that the Disklavier send every type of information about its MIDI XP. MIDI XP is a MIDI, a normal MIDI with some control changes parameters. Another experiment, the last experiment, I try to do. I try to create with Python. Python is a programmer, a language of programmer. I try to create a web app, not for use this type of web app, but to this type of web app help me to understand better the Disklavier. In this web app, I'm trying to see in real time the MIDI XP, to search the correct way to do to explain to the musician to use the MIDI XP value correctly. The web app is more simple to use because is no necessary installation, is no necessary configuration, is user-friendly, okay? And this web app I try to, is a work in progress web app. I try to create this web app only for the study, no for the use, but only for the study, to understand better how use the Cubase and the logic for the professional use in the specific to the Cubase, for the professional use, for the composer, for the musician to do to want to use Disklavier in a better way, in the professional way, because the Disklavier is a very, very great technology, and in this type of DAW is very important to receive every elements, every data from this type of piano. That's great. Very, very, very great. That's enough. It's a little small analysis from me. I continues in the next week, next month, to study this type of roadmap to understand completely which is the better way to create music production in Disklavier. Thank you for your attention.